Hello, friends and nonprofit leaders. Laura Zelke here. I'm your host of the Your Nonprofit Life podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. August is World Breastfeeding Month, and I'm about to blow your mind. This podcast episode is for everyone: moms, dads, partners, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, and friends. Did I leave anyone out? If I did, it was unintentional, I promise. Everyone who knows a person of color who is pregnant or may become pregnant soon, or is in the delivery room right now, needs to hear what my guest has to say about the importance of breastfeeding, but not just the importance of the act itself, the importance of making sure you have the opportunity to breastfeed. What? Yes, friends, if we're interested in becoming a more equitable society, then we need to first understand the impact hidden biases are having on newborns and their ability to bond or attach with the person breastfeeding them. Today, I'm interviewing Arissa Palmer, the energetic and passionate Executive Director of BreastfeedLA. You're going to love today's conversation. I did a lot of listening because this episode is packed with important information about what's being done to advocate for people of color to be given the same opportunity to breastfeed as majority population. And not only that, it's also information about the racial disparity in the field of certified lactation specialists and what's being done to combat it. And if you listen to the end, you'll learn about a wonderful opportunity to sponsor a person of color to earn their certification and a generous match to make donations go twice as far. So buckle up, because this is a fast-moving conversation with the one and only Arissa Palmer. Hey, have you ever wished you could hear some good news for a change? Well, I might have just what you've been hoping for. Welcome to Your Nonprofit Life, where we remove our rose-colored glasses and explore what leaders are actually doing to move their nonprofits from messy to thriving without burning out in the process. I'm Laura Zelke, Director of Member Experience for the Nonprofit Leadership Lab. Join me each week to explore the ups, downs, and whoopsie daisies of your nonprofit life. Let's get started. All right, Arissa, it's your turn. I'm so excited to have you on the Your Nonprofit Life podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Laura. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. As soon as I realized that August was World Breastfeeding Month, I knew that I wanted to have you come share, because I remember a couple of years ago, we were doing a boot camp together and you shared your elevator pitch with me, and I was blown away. And I know we're going to get into what your organization does, but I just remember being in shock at what you shared. And I just want to thank you for making time. You know, it's Friday night and here we are recording a podcast so that we can get this information out to the listeners. And I'm just really excited. So I've already given kind of a brief introduction to who you are in the prepend, I guess, of the podcast. But I'd love for you to just kind of introduce the members to who you are and tell a little bit about BreastfeedLA.
Sure. Thank you. Well, Laura, I'm incredibly lucky to work for an organization that fights for the rights of families and babies. In LA County, more than 80% of women who are white breastfeed, but if you're a woman of color, there's less than a 60% chance that you'll breastfeed. And even in some parts of LA, it's as low as 9%. And that's over 50,000 babies, when you think of it, who never receive the life-saving benefits of breast milk. And as I'm sure you know, and we've talked about before, breast milk has an immense amount of health benefits for mom and baby. And I get the privilege every day to make sure that every parent and baby who want to breastfeed get that opportunity. And a lot of people think too, when they think of BreastfeedLA, they think of an organization that deals directly with moms and does mom-to-mom to support. But BreastfeedLA is really unique in that we work with the systems that support a family to be successful at breastfeeding. We actually do very little direct support, almost none at all. The only direct support that we do offer is if, like, a parent, let's say, was discriminated against, then we will work with them one-on-one to help them advocate for themselves, whether it's speaking with their employer or getting them connected with community partners ACLU or the California Women's Law Center. Other than that, we work with the system. So we work a lot with legislative and policy issues around lactation accommodations and breastfeeding rights. We work a lot with training and technical assistance with healthcare systems, hospitals, clinics. We work with employers to make sure that they're providing proper lactation accommodations. We also do a lot of advocacy around paid family leave because we know that families who are able to take leave upon the birth of a baby to bond with their child and also to learn how to breastfeed and establish that relationship, it's much better for the health of them and their baby and their overall family. And so we do a lot of advocacy, not just for breastfeeding, but for other policies that are supportive of breastfeeding. Another one, too, is we do a lot of advocacy around African-American infant and maternal mortality, because we know that breastfeeding and the lack of breastfeeding affects that and also can help save lives if those families are given breast milk for their babies. And so we do a lot of advocacy around those issues as well.
Wow. So I just want to kind of unpack that for a minute with the listeners, because this might be the first time that anyone has heard about this. And if it is, they're probably in the same boat that I was. You know, I'm a white woman. I realize that I have a lot of privilege that came with that. I didn't realize, you know, I've been on this relearning the actual history and understanding systemic racism and structural racism and the impact that it's had on our society. And I honestly had no idea that women of color were a lot of times not even given the opportunity to breastfeed their own child that they just delivered in the hospital, because there's some, what is it, a stereotype or misinformation? What is that? Why would they not give a woman of color her baby after the baby's born to breastfeed that baby? That's bizarre to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of implicit bias that goes on that people don't even realize that they have biases towards certain tendencies. But I have seen, like, we do a lot of work with hospitals in terms of providing some training and technical assistance to them. And I've been in places where, as an example, I've seen issues where a parent maybe speaks another language, and rather than the nurse calling to get translation help or support, they just tend to speak louder to the mom rather than actually getting the translation help. So they might say, you know, "Oh, mom, come here. And they'll use a lot of hand motions, but that mom doesn't understand what they're saying. But taking the extra time to get on the phone and call a translator and have the parent speak to a translator when a nurse is so busy doing a million things, it makes it harder to support that patient. And so there are some things like that goes on. There are also a lot of assumptions, like, for instance, within the African American community, there's been a history of historical trauma that goes back to times of slavery where Black women were forced to wet nurse white women's babies. And so as a result of that history and generational trauma, they've moved away from breastfeeding, and now they're trying to reclaim that and restore that relationship and bring that back. But you do run into nurses and other healthcare professionals who make assumptions, right, based on what they've seen other women do, that this woman is not going to breastfeed because most of them don't, you know, or they think that in their head, obviously, but it's not true. And so a lot of what our organization does is help hospital staff and healthcare professionals understand what are those biases, those implicit biases that they don't even recognize are happening, so that they can be more cognizant about how they respond to people. And so we do a lot of work with them in terms of helping them understand the history and the context to which they're making decisions and what can they do differently.
Yeah. And I have to say, I'm going to just put this out there, because one of the things that I like to do when I can is, you know, I might be watching TV or something, but I knew I had this podcast coming up. And so I like having a Pinterest board just to make it easy to find additional resources. And we have all these nonprofits that we serve inside the lab. And I thought it'd be so cool if we had like a Pinterest board for each sector. And so I'm like, I'm going to do a Pinterest board for the breastfeeding. And
Amazing.
I am telling you that I had the hardest time finding people of color, Western people of color. Now, it was easy to find like a mom in Senegal breastfeeding her baby. But I am telling you, just from the outside, it was unbelievable to me Like I literally had to really search and really scroll to get to the point that I could actually find representation of Asian women breastfeeding their babies, of African American, Latina, any non-white, right? Indigenous.
Yeah.
Sure, you can find a picture of an Indigenous woman breastfeeding her child. It's probably black and white. And it looks like it was taken in the 1800s, and it just really underscored to me the importance of what you guys are doing at BreastfeedLA.
Yeah, that's a really good example is in terms of the materials that you see and making sure that there is representation. A lot of what BreastfeedLA has been focused on in the past several years is really changing that landscape in LA. So back in 2017, early 2018, we did a survey of all of the lactation professionals in Los Angeles, and we had over 300 lactation professionals respond to the survey. And we asked a lot of questions, and one of them was just their race and ethnicity. Another was the language that they speak. And what we found were there was over 80% of lactation providers in LA were white. And especially at the higher level, we're talking internationally board certified lactation consultants, they're almost all white, right? And so one of the things that we heard when we were doing our strategic planning in 2017 was that people really want support from someone who understands them, looks like them, understands what they're going through in their life experience. Representation really matters. And so what we've done over the past 3 years is really focused our efforts on increasing the number of lactation professionals of color. And so even just this past year, we offered over 60 scholarships for women of color to take our lactation education course. We started a lactation consultant education course where we specifically focus on the cultural aspects of breastfeeding that other curriculum doesn't discuss. And we've really put an emphasis on that breastfeeding is part of a cultural experience and that it's important to understand that. Our course is also taught by 2 women of color. That's really important to us, that again, that there's more representation, and we're working on expanding that and offering clinical opportunities so that the women in our program can actually get to the end and become international board certified lactation consultants. So that's something really important. And we hope that the next time we do the survey, we're actually doing it again this year. We're really hoping that we see a change in terms of the number of lactation professionals that are women of color. And then we also are working really hard on also the language piece. So one of the things, like you mentioned, that I had talked about before was the language piece is such a huge gap in Los Angeles because we have such a diverse community.
Right.
And even when we're talking about like Asian languages, there's so many Asian languages, and even to just find someone who speaks Mandarin when we're like the largest population of Mandarin speaking individuals in the United States, to find a lactation consultant who speaks Mandarin is really hard. There aren't many of them. And so a lot of what we're focused on too is how can we get more lactation professionals who speak other languages in Los Angeles to get that training so that they can provide that support to our community.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, Arissa, is this something that is also being addressed in other communities across the country, or how did you even find out about this?
Yeah, well, a lot of what we did was, again, in 2017, when we were doing our strategic planning, we did a community needs assessment and asked the community, what is going on in your community? What do you see? What do you want to see differently? And then we heard this feedback from people. Also in LA County, back in 2017, there was really one program that you could go through to become a lactation consultant. It was incredibly expensive and it was incredibly white-centric. And it was really geared towards people who were already nurses, even though you don't need to be a nurse to become a lactation consultant and to be an amazing lactation consultant. This particular course really put an emphasis on that. So it was very exclusive. It excluded a lot of people from getting that education. And so one of the things that we decided as a result of that process was that we really needed a curriculum that was culturally humble, a curriculum that was not as costly, that was taught by women of color, that all of those things were really important to us as a result of hearing that feedback from the community. And yes, to your question about, is this something, beyond Los Angeles? It is. This is an issue across the United States for sure. Lactation really started in the United States with the Leche League, and it was very white-centric. And it has been an exclusive process because of the requirements that it takes to become an IBCLC and all of the training and education. It requires certain college courses. That it has been exclusive in the United States, not in every country, but in the United States, the way it is, it does make it very exclusive. And so across the country, there are programs that are trying to address this, particularly in the Black community. There is a program that I know is working with historically Black colleges across the country to try and get more lactation training within historically Black universities so that there can be more people of color who are trained as professionals. So I do know that's one project, but they're all fairly new within the last year or two. And so this is really something that has been white-led for a long time, and people are really finally starting to wake up and realize that we need to do something to change this.
Yeah, it just breaks my heart. And I don't remember, maybe it was you that I was talking to about it, but with the generational trauma of wet nursing, that African Americans have historically, before slavery, of course, they were breastfeeding their children.
Exactly.
And so to know that because of slavery and being forced to nurse, and I mean, you could be nursing for years, everything that goes with that, just everything, the sacrifice of the mom doing it, because as much as it is bonding, I think it's also a sacrifice. It's a good sacrifice, right? I'm not saying it's bad, but I am saying that you are basically kind of taking care of the nutrition of at least one child, if not more.
Right. And with that historical trauma, imagine being forced to provide that nourishment to a slave owner's child while your own child cannot get that. I mean, that is going to affect you for generations to come. And we have a lot of work to do in our society to heal from that trauma that we caused.
Yeah. And a lot of it is just people waking up, majority culture, to wake up and face the fact that we were taught a very whitewashed history. And it's incumbent upon us as grownups to do our own research and dig in and read authors who don't look like us and don't necessarily sound like us, to get educated. There's so much available now. We really have no excuse not to be educated about the real racial history and racial trauma that has taken place in our country, and not just with the chattel slavery, but also with Indigenous people and just any people of color. It's just heartbreaking. And in a way, we kind of have to go through our own lament process to just face the fact that, sure, maybe nobody in my family tree owned slaves. To my knowledge, they didn't, but that doesn't excuse me to just do whatever I want now because the systems are all in place for my privilege. And it never even occurred to me that I could go to the hospital, have my baby, and not be given the opportunity to breastfeed.
Right. One of the reasons that even drew me to BreastfeedLA to begin with is the fact that I had so much privilege when I had my son. I had a husband who was really supportive. He was a teacher, so he was home for the summer, and I gave birth to my son in June. I delivered at a baby-friendly hospital, which, if you don't know, is a worldwide designation that says hospitals follow these 10 steps to supporting breastfeeding. And it's a very prestigious designation, but I delivered at a hospital that had that designation. I had so much privilege, and yet I still really struggled with breastfeeding in the beginning. And I also had postpartum depression, and it was really, really hard for me. And a lot of times I just think of, if I struggle with all this privilege to be able to have a successful breastfeeding relationship when that's all that I wanted, right? I took all the classes, I did everything right, and I still really struggle. Then I think about all the women who have half the supports that I have, right? And half the privilege. And I just think we need to do something as a society to better support families so that they can be successful breastfeeding if this is what they want. And that's really what draws me to the organization every day and fuels me to do this work. And what drew me in the beginning was really just knowing that even with that privilege, it can be hard, and that many people don't even have that. Having a child and struggling with breastfeeding, it creates a lot of mom guilt, right?
Right. It does. Yep.
failing your child. And, that's real. That mom guilt is real, and it's not even a matter of like other people giving it to you. It's just you feel it yourself that, you wanted this so badly and it didn't work out, and you're failing your child, right? You can't feed your child properly. It's very traumatic. And I just think, there's so much that we can do as a society to take that guilt away from a parent and say it's not their fault if they're not successful. There's so much that we can do easily to fix things, to make it more supportive for a mother to be able to breastfeed. That's really what drives me to do this work every day.
Mm-hmm. And so, if we were to take a journey back in time, is this kind of what you planned on doing? Like, how did you get into the nonprofit sector to begin with? Like, let's take you back to college. Like, I don't know what you majored in. What'd you major in college? And then how did that transition to getting you into like this breastfeeding organization?
Yeah, so I have my master's in health science with a concentration in community health. And I've always been involved really in, not always, but for a long time, I was involved in the nonprofit sector. From the time I was in college, I worked at the health center on campus and delivered contraceptive sex education to students on campus. And I was always involved in reproductive health somehow. After I graduated from college, I worked in HIV prevention, teen pregnancy prevention, always on the reproductive health spectrum, but never with breastfeeding at all. I knew nothing about breastfeeding. And then I had worked in the nonprofit sector for a long time as director of outreach and education at a community clinic. And then I actually took a little break from that. And then for about 7 years or so, I worked at a university teaching public health courses and also managing academics and finances. So totally different than the traditional public health space. And then I was at a point there where I just was kind of like maxed out, right? Like the only way for me to make more money or to do anything more was to teach more classes. And there's only so many classes that you could teach in a day. I also had a young son at that point, right? Like I had just had my son Aiden. And I just wanted something different. And then I had some friends who left and went to a tax consulting firm of all places. And were like, you have to join, you can make all this money, you can do all this great things. And so I was like, all right, why not? I'll just give it a try. So I left the university and I did that for a year. And it was horrible. Oh my gosh. I had
tax consulting.
I basically, my job was to convince government entities to sign over a tax credit to the AEC industry. It was very interesting. Not really. So, but it was super corporate, right? It was the type of place that they bring in breakfast, lunch, and dinner so that you're a slave to them and you sit at your desk all day long and you don't leave. And they would have these fancy dinners at really prestigious restaurants. And as a young mom, I'm like, I just want to go home and be with my family. I've been gone from my son all day. I just want to see my husband and my son. And I was just obligated to all these things. And I was traveling to Houston almost, once a month for a full week from Monday through Friday. I mean, it was crazy. So I was like, I need to get out of this space. But at this point, I'm at a part in my career where it's like, I can't really go back to the nonprofit sector and make $100,000 less. What am I going to do? I was kind of like, And so the university kept calling me, asking me to teach night classes. And I was like, I can't because I have no time. And I said, but if you can find me the right role in a nonprofit and I can leave here, then I'll have more time to teach for you. Well, the dean of College of Health Sciences said, you know what, I have the perfect job for you. She happened to be a lactation consultant herself. She had helped me with my son when he was first born. And she said, I know that the BreastfeedLA is looking for an executive director. So she introduced me to their board president and I interviewed and the rest was history. And so that's really how I started at BreastfeedLA. And I had no knowledge about lactation except for my own breastfeeding experience. But that was enough, right? Knowing how hard that was for me was enough to say, I want to work for an organization that is able to take that guilt away from other moms so that they don't have to feel bad because it's not their fault. It really is our society's fault that we are not supporting families, and one of the things that really struck me on my interview with BreastfeedLA was, they were a really small organization. They only had a few full-time staff, but they were able to accomplish so much with this small staff. I mean, they were the epitome of small and mighty, right? They had helped over 30 hospitals become baby friendly. They had improved breastfeeding rates in Los Angeles County by over 10% in a matter of a few short years. And I was like, wow, if they can make so much movement with such a small group, that's something that I want to be a part of. And that's really what drove me to be a part of the organization.
Yeah. And so what was it like then when you finally left the tax consultancy and started working at BreastfeedLA? I mean, when you walked into the organization, what was that like?
Yeah. So as a new ED who I had never been an ED before, I was completely lost. And then when I found out that I walked into an organization that was basically 90% of its funding came from grants that were ending in a matter of 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
Like, what did I walk into? What did I do? And it was funny because the tax consulting firm, they actually really kept trying to recruit me back in my first couple of months. They offered me a $25,000 bonus to come back.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they tried everything. They were sending me commission checks, right? For months after I left there, which is unheard of, but they were really trying to recruit me back. And I was like, well, I'm just going to give it a couple more months and see if I can survive. I don't know if this organization is going to survive. That's really what I thought. And so the first thing that I did was I really reached out to every ED that I knew and respected really well and said, please, can I take you to lunch and let me pick your brain and learn from you? And so I just spent really my first 6 months at least was just meeting with people that I knew and respected and just laying it out for them. Here's the situation. Here's what I walked into. I want to make this work. I want to make this successful, but I'm at a loss. What do I do?
Right.
And I just got tons of advice from people that I really respected, and people were helping me make connections to people that have now become, major donors for the organization. When I first started there, they had literally $200 in individual giving a year, which is unheard of.
Now, was it a new organization and they only had $200 in individual giving? Like, how long had they been around at that point?
Great question. So when I started there, I started in their 20th year.
20th year, and they only had $200 in individual giving?
Yes, they were heavily focused on grants. And like I said, those grants were coming to an end. And so they just were at a loss. What were we going to do? And what I was told from board in the past was, well, usually in the past when that happened, the ED would just go to part-time until we found more grants. And I was like, well, I didn't just leave a career to go part-time.
Wow.
That's clearly not going to work.
Right.
And so I just was like, okay, what can I do? So they had never had a fundraiser. They had never had anything like that. So one of the first things I did was meet the new executive director. And I had, a little fundraiser, and even to get the board to agree to charge for the fundraiser, they didn't want to charge for it. I'm like, well, how are we going to bring in money if we're putting out all this money and we don't charge? It was so interesting. So the first fundraiser we had was totally free to attend, and there was just an ask. That was my first year. And, we raised about $2,500. And I was like, well, compared to our 200, we're getting somewhere.
Right. What is it? 12 times the donation. Exactly. So that's really good. And I just want to ask you again. So that very first fundraiser you did was called Meet the Executive Director. What did you do then?
We had some videos that we had done previously for some other projects, so we shared those. And then basically we had a board member talk about the history of the organization. And then I talked about the direction of where I wanted to see us go. And also a lot of what I talked to you about, which is why I joined the organization to begin with.
Sure.
What is my passion for the organization? And just really used it as a meet and greet and a time for us to actually gather and for me to meet folks who are important to the organization. It was an opportunity for me to really network with folks that I didn't know in the community and really get to know them. So in that way, it was really good.
Right. And so it sounds like you got a lot of really excellent advice from the executive directors that you had reached out to, and it got you through that first year. And so how long have you been there now?
I'm in my 5th year. Actually, just last month was my 5-year anniversary. And we're a totally different organization. And it's really neat because when I first started, I used to tell people when staff or people were community partners would bring up, well, the old ED used to do it this way because she was the founder. She was there for 20 years, There's a lot of that history and that passion for that founder. And so there were a lot of community stakeholders and staff who would always refer to Karen did it this way, or this is how it went in the past. And so I would always tell them, well, we're in BreastfeedLA version 2.0. That's what I would tell them. And so now I really feel proud. We were just talking about this the other day on my team that we are literally in BreastfeedLA version 3.0 right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's exciting. I feel like we're totally at like that next level, which is really cool. So now we're actually, the way our funding stream is completely different than it was when we were started. In fact, I'd say probably maybe 1/5 or 1/6 of our funding now comes from grants. And we've really diversified our revenue. So we have a large donor base now. We have a lot of fee-for-service work, so we provide technical assistance to hospitals and clinics, and so we have contracts with the county health department and others, and so we have a lot of funding that way, and then we also do a lot of that training and education, and so we have fee-for-service. People come to hear our continuing education. We have world-renowned speakers who come and speak. We also started that lactation education program that I was telling you about earlier that didn't exist. And in our first year, just that lactation education course brought in $45,000 in our first year. And now
wow.
Yeah. And so that has really helped the organization to continue as well. And also when I first started, we had all of our continuing education was in-person seminars. And so one of the things that we were really lucky for during the pandemic was a couple of years ago, I said, we should really try and take some of our continuing education online because we had a lot of competitors who were already going online. And a lot of our people who came to our in-person seminars sometimes didn't want to come in person. And so they would choose other programs that were online. And so we had started building in webinars. Our first year, we had 4 webinars. And our next year, we had 10. And so we already had a lot of online components, which really helped us. And then we also have expanded some of our work. So even though we're focused in Los Angeles, we do sometimes provide technical assistance to other hospitals and throughout the state. And so that has also helped. We had also done a lot of that remotely as well, which really helped us during the pandemic because, again, a lot of the work that we had done, we had found a way to make remote prior to the pandemic. So it wasn't such a drastic, oh my gosh, what we were going to do. I feel so blessed because I hear so much from so many other nonprofit leaders about how the pandemic has really affected them. And because, one, we weren't heavily focused on grants and we had a diverse revenue stream and we were already doing a lot of things online, I actually think we fared better during the pandemic than we were before. Which is to me, I feel like unheard of. I haven't heard of very many nonprofits saying that. So I feel really lucky and blessed that we're in that position where rather than us laying off people or having to cut back, we've actually expanded since the pandemic, which I think is amazing.
I think that's really remarkable. And you came in at just the right time to keep the organization going, because with just $200 of individual donations and then most of it being grant funding about to run out, you really kept it going and you've really turned it around. And I know that prior to COVID, you were also doing some things with house parties. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how that worked out for you.
Yeah. So one of the best things I did, like you said, was talking to other EDs and other experts in the field. And including that was joining the lab, really, and participating in the opportunities that the lab offered. And so the lab had this fundraising boot camp. And I was like, why not? I'm going to do this. What do I have to lose? I have a lot to learn. And so throughout that process, there were homework assignments, there were things, and one of them was you have to do a house party. And I was like, okay. Almost at that exact same time, a lactation consultant that I knew had introduced me to an actress in Los Angeles who had had breastfed her son and was just super passionate about breastfeeding and wanted to get involved in an organization that supported breastfeeding. And so I had just scheduled a meeting to meet with her to chat. And then I was in this boot camp and they said, we need to do a house party. I said, what do I have to lose? I'm just going to ask. So when we went to the lunch, we hit it off really well. And part of the boot camp, actually, Joan Gary had this amazing webinar or video about what do you do during that meeting when you meet a new donor, and how do you make that work? What do you ask? What do you say? And so I had just watched that and it was so helpful to me. And so I just basically followed Joan Gary's script and I had this conversation with her. And then when she asked me, what could she do to support the organization, I said, would you be willing to do a house party, a small house party? And she said yes, which was amazing, right? An actress in LA said yes. And then what was originally going to be this small house gathering with, I think, like 10 to 20 people, she ended up inviting like 100 people, 75 people showed up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was an amazing event. That was our first house party, was at this actress's house with 75 people. And she actually paid for everything. She underwrote the entire cost of the event. So whatever we raised at the event was 100% profit for the organization. She paid for everything. She actually had her wedding coordinator agreed to provide her event coordination services for free. And then she was able to get a florist to donate floral for free. And then they were able to get an alcohol company to donate alcohol. I mean, it was amazing. They all just worked together to have this event. And then anything that we weren't able to get for free, like the entertainment and stuff, she just paid for, which was amazing. Yeah.
That's not really a house party. That's a house party.
Yes.
Wow.
Just a funny side note story. So Jonathan Cho, who is from Harold and Kumar, if you've ever seen that show, he came to the house, to the party, and he walks up and my assistant had no idea who he was, and he wasn't on like the guest list. And so he tried to turn him away and said he couldn't come.
Oh.
And then like another staff was like elbowing him saying, please let him in. It's fine. It's fine.
Oh, wow.
And he actually, when he showed up, he brought his kids because he thought he was going to a kid's birthday party. Apparently his wife didn't actually like tell him why he was going.
Come on, dear. Family outing. Yeah. So I have a question for you then. So how did the actress feel about it? Because here's the thing. She expressed an interest in, wanting to be involved. That would have never happened if you hadn't have asked. You know, and I can just hear people listening. They're going, well, but I don't live in LA and I don't know any actresses. But that's not what this is about. What it's about is, you're introduced to someone, whoever they are. You don't know what the potential is. It's having that courage and that passion about your organization to actually make a bold ask like, hi, I just met you. Can I have a party at your house? And I mean, not that you did that, but
Right.
But it's kind of like taking that bold initiative. And then I would also say, in a way, what I see from you here is some leadership as far as not having to micromanage the process, but really to let her host the party the way that she wanted to host it, which, knowing you, it was probably very uncomfortable for you to go in and have all those people, but she did it her way. And I'm assuming it was a very successful fundraiser for you.
It was great. And it was, it was a give and take. I feel like there's multiple questions here. So first of all, it is very scary to ask. There's no question.
Yeah,
I still get scared to ask, right? We're in the middle of our first ever peer-to-peer fundraising campaign. And one of the things that I did was reach out to, again, another ED that I really respected and that I'd seen do a peer-to-peer campaign before. And I said, what do I need to do to make this a huge success? And I wrote down all her notes. I took it back to my fundraising committee and I said, this is what we need to do. This is the plan. If we do this, we're going to do it. And, one of the things that she said was get a match. And I'm like, a match? Well, how am I going to get a match? Right. And so I used to think, I don't know any wealthy people like this, right? The people on our board are more like lactation consultants, nurses. They're not people who are multi-million-dollar people. Where am I going to find these people? But at the same time, it is about building relationships and then just going with your gut when you think it's the right time and being brave, like you said. So when she told me about that match, I was like, I'm going to ask. I have a longtime friend who I know has donated to other places, but who doesn't often donate to our organization. Or if she does, she donates a smaller amount. And I just was brave enough to ask if she'd be willing to do it. And sure enough, we got a match, right? And so a lot of it is, like you said, just being brave enough to ask and also building those relationships with people. And I'm always surprised. Sometimes our biggest donors come out of nowhere. Like I had no idea that they were going to do that. You know, we have one donor who is a nurse who donates $100 every month towards a scholarship for a woman of color to take her lactation course. So it costs about $1,500 to take them through the lactation consultant education course. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to donate that amount, but in monthly payments because I can't do it all at once. And that's amazing, right? I had no idea that that was going to come unless I continued to ask people. And so it is about that relationship. It is about being brave and asking. I'm constantly asking the board, the staff, who do you know who would want to donate to this project? One of the best things about this peer-to-peer fundraising campaign that we have right now is we have probably 100 new donors that we never had before, right? Because I finally got others to ask besides just me, which is amazing, you know? So it's just like little small things along the way and then building on them and learning from your mistakes. I remember one time we had a huge fundraiser and we barely made $10,000. And I remember Joan Gary saying, well, you know, you can never do that again. And I was like, okay. But I was like, all right, I got to learn from this. And then I took that back to the team and I'm like, look, this is embarrassing. Someone called me out on this. I respect. We got to make this better in the future. And the next year we raised 45,000, you know? And so we're going to make mistakes on the way. It's not going to be perfect, but if you can learn from them and grow from them, then you are going to really make a difference in your organization and help them get to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I hear, I mean, so much passion for what you're doing. And I think it's just contagious. And I'm really excited because I just know somebody is going to sponsor a person of color to go through your lactation course. And I'm going to put a link on the show notes page to donate so that when you get that donation, how much is it? $1,500?
It's about $1,500 to take them through the 90-hour lactation course.
Okay. Yeah. I hope that someone who's listening will just say, you know what? I'm going to donate that. I'm going to do it.
Yeah. And starting Monday, we have another match. So if they even want to donate half of that, we can still get the full amount.
So for $750 donated,
we'll be able to take someone through. It's going to be a week. So that one's going to be Monday through Friday. So I don't know what Friday's date is.
It's Friday night at 7:00. Your match starts Monday
Friday.
And it ends next Friday.
Yeah,
I don't know if I can get it out that fast, but we'll try. And if not, then, you know, just know that even the full amount is going to help somebody. And that's really what it's all about, is making, I guess, in a way, you're kind of trying to get the lactation consultant sector to be more representative of the people that it's serving, and also to really encourage the people that they're serving. It's important and it's a good thing. And it's almost like you're bringing a sense of healing to a family. You know,
I hope so.
So I interviewed Julie Beam, who's the executive director of Attachment Trauma Network. And, you know, I think that the breastfeeding and the bonding that happens during that time is part of the attachment. And so when you don't have that bonding time, does that then affect the child and the parenting going on?
Attachment parenting is a lot of what we teach about, and just that initial attachment and bonding that a parent and child can have, that actually has been shown. There have been studies that have shown that that leads to less violence later in life, right? That if you have that early attachment and bonding, you're going to be more secure in your future. And so, yeah, that is totally related. In fact, I listened to that podcast and I was like, I need to meet Julie. I need to reach out to her, because a lot of what we talk about is that early attachment and bonding is really healing. And when you talk about, you know, the ACEs and the first childhood experiences, and breastfeeding is really one place where you can build that healing. For sure.
And so, again, you're not necessarily working with the mothers themselves for the breastfeeding process as much as you are going in and educating the nurses and doctors and getting information into shelters or
employers. We work a lot with home visiting agencies, nurses, lactation consultants, doulas, midwives, physicians, employers, all of the systems that support a family to be successful at breastfeeding.
Yeah, because it is a family thing. It's something that the family has to be behind. And I've seen this play out just even in majority culture where there's a lot of almost like shame put on a woman who needs to breastfeed at a particular moment, being, shuffled off into a different room, not allowed to participate in the adult conversation. It can be very traumatizing, I think. As much as you're bonding with the baby, there's also the need for continued adult interaction. And so I can just see that this is such a big priority, not just for mother-child, but for society at large, to have moms bonding with their babies through breastfeeding if they can. And again, this is not to shame or stigmatize anybody who can't.
Right.
There are situations where people just can't, and that's okay. It's fine.
Absolutely.
This is all about loving on the moms who want to do it,
right,
and making sure that they're at least given the opportunity to decline if they choose not to, and the education so that hopefully they're not choosing not to unless they're having an issue.
Well, actually, I mean, when you look at the data, over 90% of parents intend to breastfeed and actually start breastfeeding in the hospital. But what happens is it slowly drops off or quickly drops off, right? So there's the drop off of before you leave the hospital, right? And then there's the drop off when you get home and reality sets in, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's also the drop off when paid family leave ends,
right?
At least in California, where we are lucky enough to have paid family leave,
yeah.
When the parent goes back to work. And so there's all these things that are in societal norms that are getting in the way of that parent being able to meet their goals. And so what we're about is how can we support parents to meet their own goals, whatever those goals are. If their goal is 3 months, their goal is 3 months. If their goal is 6 months, their goal is 6 months. If their goal is 3 years, then that's amazing too, right? Our role is to really make sure that we have the systems in society to support that family to meet their goal.
And I just think that it's powerful to have an organization that is doing the work that you're doing, even in a time like this, that you are already poised and prepared to continue doing your work and actually have a much larger audience even now than maybe you would have. I know we need to wrap up, and I just wanted to ask, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you and to learn more about BreastfeedLA?
Yeah, so please come to our website. It's www.breastfeedla.org. And then you can click right there if you want to donate to our campaign. And if there's anything you want to get involved in, we love volunteers. We love collaborators. So please reach out. Don't be a stranger.
Yeah. And are you on LinkedIn? So we could maybe put a link up there for your LinkedIn profile if people want to reach out and get in touch.
Absolutely. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. We've got it all. Yeah. So
there
our
you
handle
go.
is at BreastfeedLA.
Okay, great. And I will put links to all of that in the show notes page. And I just want to thank you for your time, Arissa. Today, we kind of went all over the place with this. And I think that people not only got an education about breastfeeding, but also the important work that you're doing to advocate for women of color to be given the opportunity and given a fair shake and given the support that they are going to need, especially if maybe they're having some challenges with it, that they just don't give up, that you're actually helping them meet their goals. And it's just a reminder to us also in majority culture to do our work. We have work to do. We've got lamenting to do. We've got reparations to take care of. And we just need to get with the program here. And
100%.
If we go out and we see a woman of color who's breastfeeding, to look at that as a beautiful thing and look at that as something that we need more of that.
Absolutely. I'm the weirdo who, whenever I see someone breastfeeding in public, I'm always giving them kudos and shouting them out, because we need that encouragement. We need to lift each other up for sure.
Right. And I think that there's also something, and this might be TMI for any of the guys that are listening, but you need to have that peace when you're doing it. Feeling the shame isn't going to help you breastfeed your child. Feeling dirty looks from people is not going to help you. It actually hinders that process of the breastfeeding. And so if it makes you uncomfortable, look away. Don't be rude about it.
Honestly, I think that it's interesting because breastfeeding is something that even dads can relate to. At one time, we were doing some legislative visits at the Capitol, and we met these men who were like working on shipyards, who were going to Feinstein's office at the same time as us. And we started talking to them, and they had stories, right? Their wives had trouble breastfeeding, or their parents breastfed them until they were 3. Everyone has a story, whether it's good or bad. And we need to use that to raise more awareness and to bring us all together. Absolutely.
Right. And so I just want to thank you again for your passion and excitement around breastfeeding, and that we're able to get this episode out in World Breastfeeding Month. I'm excited about that. We're going to try really hard to get the episode released as soon as possible. So if people do want to donate and hit that match, they can go online by Friday, the 28th of August, 2020 to get a match. Or, maybe when you're listening to this, if you're listening to it later, there might be another match going on. So, don't let the date throw you off.
Absolutely. And if you're inspired, next week is Black Breastfeeding Week, right? So that's the perfect time to really reach out and dig deep and think of how you can support other Black women to be able to breastfeed.
Right. And I really did create a great Pinterest board. I dug and I found some beautiful artwork, some great tips, some links, some information about engorgement and pumping and all the breastfeeding things.
Awesome.
And it's all on the show notes page. And again, thank you for the interview. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you to the listeners who've made it through the whole podcast.
And thank you so much, Laura, for just inviting me to do this. It's so outside my comfort zone, but I'm so glad and honored to be here with you. So thank you so much for that.
If this was outside your comfort zone, you cannot even tell. Your passion just took over. It was awesome. I just want to thank you for the interview, and I will see you in the village.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening. To access the show notes or share feedback on this podcast and link over to our socials, visit our website at yournonprofitlife.com. That's yournonprofitlife.com. And hey, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you're going to love The Village. It's our exclusive online community where we take what we're learning in the Nonprofit Leadership Lab and apply it. We take it to the next level with live Q&As, boot camps, online book clubs, and legit support from experts committed to helping you extend your nonprofit life. By the way, since we're just getting started, it would mean the world to us if you'd subscribe to the podcast and leave a great review on iTunes. The reviews will help us get the podcast in front of more people as we try to take the whole sector from messy to thriving. See you next time.